Hello, everybody, and welcome to the LeanTossup College Football Podcast. Today, we are going to be previewing the Pac-12. We have a special guest, but before I introduce him, I'm going to introduce, obviously, our co-host, BuckMetrics. How are you doing tonight?
I am great. I actually feel like the conference centered in San Francisco. And why do I say that? According to Google Bard, San Francisco is the American city that is most famous for having buildings without elevators. As is the conference as I see it. I don't have any teams elevator up or elevator down. I think there's a lot of teams with similar narratives, a lot of returning quarterbacks, a lot of the same question marks. So, going to be interesting to see the shuffling at the top and the bottom.
Yeah, I do agree with that sentiment. Today, we're also going to be joined by Mark Schipper, and we're going to ask him his sentiment about the Pac-12. How are you doing tonight, Mark?
What's up, guys? I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
For sure. So, all right. So, what we've been doing for all of our guests is we've been doing a little bit of an interview. So, we basically asked them a couple of questions about college football and how they've enjoyed college football in the past. So, we'll go ahead and get started with that. So, who's your team?
It's not a simple question for me to ask because I follow college football nationally and kind of always have, but a few teams that really got me rolling into college football. I was born in Iowa City, Iowa. So I was born in a college town. The Hawkeyes were my first team. A lot of family connections there. One of my first memories of life on this planet actually is in Kinnick Stadium with my dad and uncle. So that's a very close team for me. That same uncle later moved to Florida and got me into Florida State. Florida State led to Florida State, Florida, Miami, the big three down there. So Florida football was huge for me. I also like some West Coast teams, Oregon, Washington, and I ended up moving to the West Coast after high school. I went to school at UCLA. So UCLA became my alma mater, but UCLA USC for me growing up in the Midwest was just a great rivalry. So I don't have that SoCal thing about UCLA USC and any kind of genetic hatred. So those are kind of my teams that got me into college football.
Interesting. As a USC guy, I've kind of come to see UCLA with a little less hatred and more as a business partner, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Weird how that kind of shakes out. So, okay, well, you've kind of, don't really have that next question. We'll skip ahead a little bit. So, is there any program for which you have irrational or unsuspected disdain?
Yeah, it's always a great question. I'm writing a college football book right now, so I don't want to give anybody the impression that I'm not giving their program a fair shake. I'll say this about teams growing up as a young kid who I didn't like. I hated Ohio State, and the reason I hated Ohio State is because they tortured Iowa. Iowa had some great teams that were upset by Ohio State, and they had a hard time beating them. So Ohio State was the big bully. Michigan was too, but Iowa and Michigan had a much tighter series. So Ohio State was one, and then Texas, the University of Texas, the Longhorns, like a lot of people. I couldn't figure out what it was about Texas because coming up in the 90s, Texas was not a very good program. They were mediocre for almost every year. And I didn't know what made them such a special group. And even when they got to the Big 12, they weren't very good. So I've now seen a great Texas team and how much water they draw when they're good. And I don't have hatred for either of those programs anymore. Now I'm just interested by their place in the college football landscape.
Yeah. So, what do you think is the best logo in college football, and what do you think is the best helmet?
There's so many. I love graphic arts, and I don't know if you can see my walls behind me. Like I got an orange bowl up high up there. I got a rose bowl
Oh,
over
nice.
here. So like I love graphic arts, and I'm wearing a rose bowl hat and all this stuff. So it's tough for me, but some of the ones I loved coming up, and there's going to be a theme in this. They're old school. A lot of them have changed, and they bug me now. Old North Dakota State Bison was one of the coolest
Wow.
ever. Um, the old Florida Gator with the sweatshirt on, the old Ibis Hurricane with the Popeye pipe in his mouth is one of the greats. And the Colorado Buffalo is another one that was always really cool and one of my favorite helmets. So the helmet question is hard, but for just to be a little different than this one, I won't say Michigan or Ohio State. The Colorado Buffaloes have a really cool helmet.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a first. All right. Who is on your college football Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, good question. I was thinking about this, and I don't always think about it in those terms. So I got a few coaches and a few players. Charlie Ward was one of my favorite quarterbacks coming up. I was a football player. I played quarterback. I was multi-sport, and so Charlie Ward really appealed to me in that way. Joey Harrington at Oregon, I loved. Randy Moss. But really, when I think about it, I loved coaches. Hayden Fry at Iowa, Steve Spurrier at Florida, Bobby Bowden at Florida State. Those guys, that would be kind of, I'd have to narrow it down to get the four on Rushmore, but those are some of the guys who have meant a lot to me.
Um, what do you love the most about college football?
I love the big picture of it. I love the color, the sound and the fury of it, the stadiums, the yearly story arc, the rise and the fall of teams and players. I love its connection to place and its place in American history and culture. College football, I understand that a lot of people watch things sort of for what's happening right now, but college football got here for a reason, and it's because it's deeply connected to our narrative as a country after the Civil War. It's been an extremely important game, and so I love that element of its significance in American culture, and then what a fantastic dramatic story it makes every fall.
Not to and apologize if this is too soon to ask. Is kind of sounds like maybe your book has some themes along those lines. Is that a fair guess?
Oh yeah, and that's no secret. That was two things set me off on this book journey. One is what I just said, in untangleable connection in American history and culture. The other one is the sports on the verge of a revolution. I said that in 2020 before all of this
Wow.
stuff started happening. It started
Yeah.
happening almost immediately afterward, and the trigger for me, or the revelation that I had that sort of made me realize the dam was about to break, was watching all these teams play football in front of empty stadiums for the TV money. And what I realized is that undercurrent that's always there for people who know what college football and college athletics are about. It came to the surface for everyone to see, and it was just going to be a matter of time before all the things that connected to that sort of went wild, went haywire, and needed to be rewired. And that's what we got going right now.
Cool. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to your book then. When that's out, definitely we'll pub that out for you. So, from big picture to smaller picture, or it could be a big picture thing. What's your favorite college football moment? I'm guessing it's not the Pac-12 imploding.
No, that's probably one of my least favorite moments, or least favorite drawn out torturous stories.
Yeah.
It's very hard. I'll say I'll give you two quickly. 1993, when Florida State, when Bobby Bowden broke through and won his national title, I was very young. But my uncle, who I mentioned earlier, he passed away a few years ago. Beloved uncle, he gave me a birth or a Christmas present, 1992 December, a Florida State mini helmet. Nobody had mini helmets at that time. It was a really cool gift. And he had on a post-it note, 93 national champs, my pick. And like magic, they won it that year. So that was, I remember calling him, and that was a really cool moment. And then another one actually with my dad in the University of Iowa. I could be wrong on this. It's the 2004 Citrus Bowl, Capital One Bowl. Iowa beat Nick Saban and LSU on a Hail Mary
Yep.
to end the game. I was out with
Yeah.
my dad, a bunch of his friends, a group, and I remember I was up on the table at the restaurant. We had a big back room to ourselves, and I was up on the table uh, doing a victory jig, and everyone went wild around me, and it was just a big room full of people who just went nuts. And it was one of those things. It's like that's what college football is about. Really, is it brings so many people together.
One thing about that before we get to the next question, I don't know if you remember this. That was the same season when LSU won on a last second Hail Mary against Kentucky.
Yep.
That was
Yep.
that same. Yeah, crazy
Yep.
how that just closed that little circle.
Yeah. They lived by the sword, and then they were slain by the sword.
Exactly.
Okay. Then which college game day would you most like to experience? I feel like you've seen a lot of them, but which one's your favorite?
Yeah, I got a bunch. The book thing, the project is I went to. I've been in 17 games, and like really, they're the best rivalries around the
Awesome.
country. I covered most of them. But one place that I went, one of my favorite stadiums in the country, I went the week there wasn't a game, was the Swamp in Gainesville. I went down on the field, I shot video, I made a video. I actually got to hang out with Steve Spurrier that morning. And the Swamp is just a magnificent on-campus stadium. It's such a cool place. It's such a unique place, and game days there are just rocking. So I got to get back to the Swamp when the stadium is filled. Oh, a Florida State game would be ideal for me.
Okay, interesting. Because you've got a lot of experience, I'm going to be fascinated to know your answer here. So, what do you consider the best college team that you've seen? Doesn't have to be in person; it could be on TV.
Well, I'll just give it to you in person because it's a very easy answer, and it just coincided with my move from the Midwest to California. And it's USC, and it's the USC teams really from 2002 to 2005. When
Mm-hmm.
I got to Southern California in 2002, it was late August. One of the first things I did was go to USC Auburn at the Coliseum. The
Oh,
Coliseum and the Rose Bowl were on my list of stadiums to get to ASAP. I saw Auburn was in town. Tickets were very cheap and easy to get. USC was coming
yeah.
off a low period. The stadium was not well attended for the first part of
No,
Pete Carroll's tenure. But the
I'm sure I
fascinating
saw
thing to
you
me
at
is,
that game.
I'm sure we did. I'm sure I did,
There
man.
weren't
Sack
many of
up.
us.
Yeah, exactly. But the fascinating thing for me for that was I ended up seeing USC, I think, 3 times that year, and the last one
Mm-hmm.
was in the Orange Bowl against Iowa. By
Yeah,
total coincidence, we were down in Florida with family over the break. Iowa should have played in the Rose Bowl, but the BCS and the selections messed that up. So we ended up playing a Rose Bowl in Miami between USC and Iowa. And
yeah,
Iowa was 8-0 in the Big Ten that year. They'd been upset once early in the season. And Iowa had a fantastic team. Their offensive line
they
was
did.
powerful. And USC just smoked them. It was a
Yeah,
good first half, but USC smoked them in the second. And then from 2003 to 5, I was at USC games regularly, some of their best. The Cal game in 2004, after Cal had upset
yep.
them the year before. I was at the 2005 SC UCLA game, which was one of the wildest, like electric atmospheres I've ever been in. And then USC just crushed UCLA. But I was in
Mm-hmm.
the Rose Bowl in 2006, the next year when UCLA upset USC and kept them out of the BCS title game. So the USC teams, though, from 2002 to 2005 were the best I saw in person. And actually, the 2005 team was the best, and they were better than Texas, but Texas won that game.
The defense is a little shaky on that team. It was just a little
Yep.
transition hiccup year, but man, that offense was unreal. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
okay,
All right,
Oh, and
second.
the offense cost them that game. I mean, USC had that
yeah,
game won.
yep,
They made a few uncharacteristic mistakes. Strangely,
yep,
the moment seemed to get the better of them, which never happened under Pete
exactly.
Carroll. And
Yeah,
it was a huge. That was like as big a college football game as you could
it
imagine. The
was.
way those two teams climaxed together in that game, it was a splendid game.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah. Which movie have you seen the most times?
I love movies. Probably two. I don't know which one I've seen more. Probably Blade Runner and Chinatown would be two I've probably seen
Ooh,
about as much as any. Both set in L.A. Both very different L.A. movies.
old school with Chinatown.
I
Um,
love Chinatown.
all right, and finally, what's your non-political message to make the world a better place?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. To me, it's I think be respectful of people, respect people and where they've come from and their traditions and the things that matter to them. I think if you treat people well in that fashion, you'll make friends and you'll create more harmony than discord. I think disrespect causes a lot of problems.
Agree. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that. Nice to get a little more background on you. And somehow we transitioned from that pleasant thought to the demise of the Pac-12, the conference that I grew up on. I'm just going to go through just set out three different bullet points here and just get your reactions from each of you on both of these. So I've got basically a group of big winners, a group of other winners, and then the losers. I'm just going to kind of say my piece here and just see what you all think. So I have for the big winners in the demise of the Pac-12. The obvious one is USC. They get closer to the market rate for media rights revenue. They're on a bigger stage, which has bugged us, to be honest, for quite a while. More national exposure, and will be on NBC a lot in the next TV contract. UCLA, I think, is a bigger winner. They're getting above market value for the media rights. The pressure is really off of them going to the Big Ten. Nobody's expecting anything, and at the same time, they can expand their recruiting footprint. The biggest winner of all is Fox. They get late night programming that they want for less cost of the entire Pac-12 without the dead weight that comes with it. They'll have to kind of generously reinterpret the no counter programming language of the current agreements they have with the NBC, because they're going to want, I think, just kind of move up that late night spot to have a late window to plug those teams in. It's not just the Pac-12, the two other teams, but they also have the Big 12, so they can, they're going to have a lot of good options for that last late night spot. And again, they get it at less than what they were paying before. So, any sense of a disagreement, Mark?
Definitely Fox is a monster winner here, and they set out to win and cut into ESPN clearly. And they've certainly done that. They've added a lot of variety to their package as well. I don't agree that UCLA got above their market value. I think they got exactly their market value. That's a narrative that's kind of come up, and it's never been fully explained to me. If UCLA was not worth that, they wouldn't have been paid that. TV networks aren't into doing favors for people. And if it was because USC couldn't go without UCLA, then USC wasn't good enough to command the spot on their own. So to me, it's symbiotic, it's balanced, it's what they needed to do to get both schools to leave their ancient home. And I don't know, maybe you guys have seen this going around. I posted a piece on the demise of the PCC in the mid 50s. That's the forerunner of the modern PAC. And the demise and the rebuild happened essentially at the behest of UCLA and USC. The conference has always been centered in LA. If you know anything about the 1950s, that was UCLA's most dominant decade in the league.
Yep.
A coach named Red Sanders was there. They essentially were in a national title hunt for 4 straight years, won the league 3 straight years, split the 54 title with Ohio State and Woody. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that, but that's where the league started, and that's ended up being what finished the league is those two going. So I would actually say Washington and Oregon are the biggest winners out of this, because the Big Ten was not, and Fox were not going to take more teams. So when the Pac disintegrated, those two guys getting the call up, even at the reduced rate, which they are actually being paid a little bit below both of their values because the desperation was there. Those two schools were very fortunate to get out the Pac with a lifeboat.
Yeah, before I get Robert's opinion on that, I just wanted to, one question on that. Oregon, absolutely, and absolutely Washington wants that. I'm a little concerned because they're very different programs in that, I think Oregon's a lot more well-funded than Washington, and I think Oregon can be a little more indifferent to the reduction in media rights, and I think that's a little more difficult for Washington to deal with. And Oregon just recruits on a different level than Washington, too. I like Washington. They're like my sneaky, I got you guy program here, and I'm glad they're coming along with us. Not really Oregon. I don't want to compete with them recruiting. And that kind of speaks to, I wonder where Washington lands. I like the Boar. I just don't know if they're going to be enough. They need to get it back to like the Don James level of talent, and I don't know if they can now.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. They need to adjust for the new situation. Washington has showed they're capable of it, but it was in a little bit different era.
Yeah.
And the Seahawks have moved even more into their space than they were in the 80s and 90s. And Washington deals with all the things that the big city urban schools deal with, and they're a public school, which can fluctuate. So I would agree.
Yep.
But Oregon, at the same time, Oregon has essentially one mega donor who leads the charge on all of this, and Phil Knight's not going to be there forever. So Oregon better be smart about this as well and be making plans for the slightly more distant future.
Agree.
I think
Robert, what do you think?
Yeah, I think being in the Big Ten is kind of that's kind of the insurance policy for Phil Knight being there long term, right? I mean, eventually we know these media right deals are probably heading to $100 million a year. Oregon is now in a conference that seems heading towards that at some point, so I think they will be okay on that. I think, yeah, people are saying online like Oregon lost, and I'm not sure why specifically they're saying that. I mean, they got to a better conference. I mean, yes, it's probably a more difficult conference. I think Fox did win. I think we're definitely seeing Fox as basically running the Big Ten, and to a lesser extent, basically running several other conferences here by their influence in the Big Ten. Because a lot of the presidents said we didn't want Washington, we didn't want Oregon here, and then basically you now have something where the Pac-12 was dissolving, and Fox said we're adding them. That's it. You're adding them, and then that's it. You're doing this, and they're like, we didn't want to do it, but now Fox said we had to do it. So Fox is paying our bills, so we have to do it for that. And it's really showing that the networks are in charge here. Like the president of Northwestern, you're not in charge here, right? The person who's cutting you the checks every year, they're the one who's in charge. And I think that's showing that. I think I know they're not. This will kind of segue into your next thing, but the losers, and again, obviously there's four obvious losers, but on top of that, I think the next kind of tier of losers, even though they're not necessarily here, the next tier of losers is Rutgers, Northwestern, these lower tier schools in the SEC and the Big Ten, because they just learned that at the end of the day, no one's looking out for them. At the end of the day, if your conference is dissolving for whatever reason, there may not be a lifeboat. And I think that there's a sinking feeling in their stomach after they saw this. It's like, okay, we're here right now, we're getting massive checks right now, but you know what? I don't know what's happening tomorrow or the day after, and I'd be a little worried about that if I was them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and just before we move on, let's just thank God that the president of Northwestern is not in charge.
That's the Big Ten.
So, yeah, one other thing, I'm kind of curious what you all both think about this. I think that Utah actually comes out a bit of a winner too. I mean, they were in the Mountain West 12 years ago, and they're going to get more revenue. I think they kind of grabbed the late night time slot first choice for the Big 12 now. I think they probably just have more appeal than BYU nationally. I know BYU is a religious school, is widespread, but I just think that Utah probably is going to get a lot more exposure now than before. And the other beneficiary is here, the ACC breakaways with all this, or the potential breakaways, Miami, Florida State, and Clemson, to the extent that maybe they can pull some trickery here and get a redo of the ACC grant of rights. Maybe it's an opening for them. The losers. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Or disagreements, really?
I largely agree on Utah. Utah joined the Pac-12. They were promoted to the Pac-12, and they've performed. Utah's done everything asked of them. They've done everything but win the Rose Bowl. They've been really the most consistent program probably in the league since they've been there in terms of year-on-year performance. Going to the Big 12, they're kind of joining more of their peer group schools in terms of culture and affability. And Utah actually might be the best football program in that league. The league has no flagship, and it's there for the taking.
Yeah, agree. Robert?
Yeah, the Big 12 is the new Big 12, especially minus Texas, minus Oklahoma. I mean, already, even Texas and Oklahoma were not particularly consistent. I mean, it's not like they'd won every year for the last decade, right? There was always teams that would come up. Sometimes it was TCU, sometimes it was Baylor. Last time it was Kansas State. There's been a lot of teams that have won the Big 12. And that was even with them. And we thought, these are the top two programs in the Big 12. And suddenly they're not even winning the Big 12 all the time, right? Now the other teams are. And now you've got a completely wide open conference. And then you mix that with, the consistency of Utah. Utah's been a very consistent program in the Pac-12. You now take that to the Big 12. You take it from the Pac-12 to the Big 12, where there's no defense. And you actually have a defense. They could basically dominate that conference. And I think it's going to be really interesting. It's a very good home. The Big 12 is a very good home for them. And again, like a lot of people talk about access to the playoff, winning the Big 12 is definitely going to get you a playoff berth. 100% is going to get you a playoff berth. The question is now seeding doesn't particularly matter, but like at least you win the Big 12. I mean, at this point, and there's now calls for basically readjusting the format. I think they kind of have to do that just because they're saying, assuming the Pac-12 isn't going to exist and be a Power Five conference anymore. But basically, like the Big 12 is probably going to send one, two, maybe three teams each year potentially, and I think Utah, if they have a decent year, could be one of those in most years. Like probably 8 out of 10 years or so, they could definitely be one of those teams. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Agree.
Agree.
The losers, I mean, obviously the obvious losers, the forgotten four, and everybody said everything about that. I don't know if we need to go over that. The angle that I kind of see that I haven't really heard anybody speak of is I don't really know if Arizona and ASU really come out of this great. I mean, they get more revenue,
Yeah.
but they're going to be shoved a lot to ESPN Plus, and especially for ASU when you're in rebuild mode, you don't want to be behind the paywall too much. And ESPN's been really aggressive in putting some really solid, especially basketball games on ESPN Plus. They're going to have no qualms about shoving those guys on there, 6 or 7 or 8 times a year. So I think that's a sneaky kind of like, okay, good, you landed somewhere, but not as great as maybe people think.
for them, I kind of feel like they got very lucky in the fact that they are a lot closer to Texas than Oregon and Washington State are. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's like if you look at it, I think Arizona is roughly comparable in size to Oregon and Washington, the state of Oregon, the state of Washington. And I don't think Arizona is per se bigger, and I mean those are the two bigger schools. But obviously, in those states, you have Washington and Oregon; those are the two bigger football teams. They're going to the Big Ten. But I can't. But like the fact is that they're a lot closer for the other Big 12 members, and I feel like that definitely played into them being added to the conference. And they're pretty big, and it's not horrible because again, a lot of the Big 12 teams are in Texas, right? I think like what half of the Big 12 is in Texas. So like basically, I feel like it's very easy for them to say, okay, it's a lot easier to take a flight out to Arizona than it is to take a flight out to almost Canada, basically. So
Yeah, yeah, it is. I could not understand. I think the Pac-10 should have stayed together. I think they could have found a way to get it done. I do think Arizona State and Arizona are both losing. Arizona got obsessed, I think, with going to the Big 12 to play in the basketball conference.
Yep.
They're a basketball school. They've been in the Pac 45 years. They have one conference co-championship and they never even played in the Rose Bowl. Arizona State has been there multiple times. They won a Rose Bowl. Arizona State has always been to me a bit of a sleeping giant in that spot. In that Arizona State 3 different times in its career in 3 different places as an independent, as a WAC, as a PAC have been within a game and sometimes even a drive or a poll vote of a national title. They just
Mm-hmm.
never quite broke through. The 96 team had every opportunity to win it. They were beat on a last second drive by a great Ohio State team that was good enough to win the national title itself. So Arizona is going to go from playing second fiddle to UCLA in the conference, which is how they built their basketball program, to second fiddle to Kansas in the Big. And I guess that's what they're going to do with their basketball program. As far as football goes, Arizona won't matter. Arizona State is going to have work to do.
All right. Oh, that was good, and hopefully that wasn't just the same thing you've heard in 20 other podcasts. We've striving to do things a little differently here. So, overview of the Pac-12. Just a few little nuggets before we start doing some team previews here. There were 4 new coaches last year, head coaches in the conference. They actually went a combined 39-14, which really good job by I would say surprisingly good job by the athletic directors in getting that done. It's pretty even along the top tier of the teams, and we'll get to that a little more in a second. Every team really has a fatal flaw, I think, until proven otherwise, and that's what's going to make this an interesting season. And along those lines, typically that fatal flaw is defense, unless your name is Utah. This was by far the worst defensive Power 5 conference by the BuckMetrics ratings. I actually had the Sun Belt as a better composite defensive rating conference in the Pac-12. So
That's not
staying on
good.
brand in the Pac-12. No, but it's not really unexpected if you saw any of the football last year. First team that we're going to preview, it'll be my most fascinating team, Oregon, who I've said a couple times here, the team for which I have a rational disdain. Their offense I had it as a plus 7.3. It was really, really, surprisingly good. I had him 12th in GGAB. I had him 13th in Apex. So those are basically running and passing measures. Bo Nix I have as the 5th rated returning quarterback in all of FBS. Um, they added to a really good passing game. Tez Johnson from Troy. I had him ranked 36th in player Ryan last season, so that's a huge addition. There are some question marks. The new OC, Will Stein, he comes from UTSA, but he only had one season as the OC there. And then he followed Barry Lunney, who really, I think, has proven to be a good OC at Illinois since, given that he's had no quarterbacks to work with. Stein also inherited Frank Wilson, who had 28 career starts when he took over there, and a very experienced offensive line. So I don't know if we've really seen what Will Stein can do when he has to make the offense his own. The offensive line is actually bottom 20 in my experience metric and bottom 24 in the improvement metric. And making that they've recruited very well on the offensive line. Their new offensive line coach, his coaching experience consists of 1 year as the offensive line coach at Hawaii, and then an assistant DL coach for the Minnesota Vikings last season. Scary. Last year, their pass defense was go ahead.
I was just going to say, I wouldn't have taken a single person off the staff of the Minnesota Vikings last year. They were awful.
Very fair. The defense last year, the pass defense is okay. The run defense is pretty bad. So why are they a fascinating team? This team, I just felt when I was watching their season unfold, I felt like I was on a planet where math and physics didn't make sense. Their offense improved from a 3.5 to a 7.3, and that was after losing Joe Moorhead, whom I love, under an offensive coordinator whose absence immediately made Jordan Travis better at Florida State, under the OC who also made Brady White immediately better at Memphis by leaving. Both those players had their apex improved by 25 plus points, and under the same OC who coached him to a measly 85 apex at Auburn. It didn't make sense. There is a series of red flags for this team. There was outright regression on the head coach's side of the ball in year one on defense. It regressed by more than 2 of my ratings points. Every signal, moreover, was that it should improve. There was a reasonable expectation for a big step up. It's not like they were losing a lot of guys from the prior team. That Oregon State game was unbelievable. I don't know how you lose a 21-point lead with 19 minutes left, and the other team literally does not even throw the ball. That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
The new line OL coach is super questionable. The OC needs to prove himself. The DC has proven himself, and he stinks. I don't know why Lanning called plays supposedly for just one game against Utah and then just gave that back up. Maybe he thinks that Lupoy is going to leave. The staff is is full of young, unqualified guys. But the thing is, these are all the same red flags I saw last season. I was wrong. I don't know what to make of this team. It's just logic and gravity just don't hold with this team. They've got a 5-game stretch here that's really brutal. Their second group of 5 games at Washington, host Washington State, at Utah, host Cal, host USC. That is a stretch that is brutal. The win total is 9.5. The under is getting play. That seems kind of fair, but nothing makes sense. So it's fascinating, but it's fascinating because it's something I don't understand. Help me out here.
Yeah. It's Robert. You want me to go, and then you can.
You go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Run the closing leg. Yeah, with the coaches and the coaching staff, it's all super interesting to me. Dan Lanning is a first-time head coach, period. So he comes from an SEC school to the Pac-12, which to me gives him an advantage in terms of mindset and mentality. We talked about UCLA in the 1950s and Red Sanders. Red Sanders came over from the SEC. For people who might not know, the SEC has always done business the same way down there. They recruit, they do whatever it takes to recruit, and the only goal is to win. And other than a guy from way back named Dan McGuggan, Red Sanders is the best coach in Vanderbilt history. So he brought that to UCLA, and UCLA became a recruiting behemoth. They built a scholarship system when the PCC didn't allow scholarships. Everyone was doing it, but UCLA became very good at it. They did what it took to get players in. Dan Lanning is doing that at Oregon. You talked earlier about Oregon being a good recruiting program. The thing I think going into the season to look at is the people they've brought in. I think three dozen people left the Oregon program in the offseason.
Yeah.
And they brought in some pretty good people, and they brought some good people on the defensive side to get bigger. And I think they feel good about it's like the number 9 transfer class and the number 9 overall class. So to me, Dan Lanning in his first year did about as good as you could expect a first year Power 5 head coach period to do. And I think Oregon remains extremely dangerous. Bo Nix is as weird as all the stuff that you were just talking about. He does a lot with his legs. He's a little bit erratic with the ball, but Oregon had more 50-plus yard completions, I think, than any team in the country last year. So it might not make sense, but to me, fascinating year 2. I want to see if Dan Lanning starts making fast strides in terms of improving as a head coach. If he does, he's clearly one of the best young head coaching prospects in the country.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, again, I thought, and we talked about this early last season, I thought, okay, basically Miami got Oregon's past head coach, and then Oregon got the defensive coordinator for Georgia. I'm like, okay, well, Miami won that trade. They got Mario Cristobal. They're in great shape. I'd have been like, Miami set, Oregon potentially rebuilding here. We don't, like, we always said that the defense was Kirby Smart's defense, not this guy's defense. So what's he going to be able to do? Well, and again, one game in, they got destroyed by Georgia, so we're like, this isn't that good. And then now that the next game they played Eastern Washington, scored 70 points, okay, whatever. But as we got there, like they basically they had Bo Nix, not the greatest sign ever as well, but as the season went, they kept winning games and winning games and winning games and winning games that they're the closer games, and it's like, hey, this team isn't that bad, and Bo Nix was actually not bad either, and it's like, wait a minute, is this guy a good head coach? Is Bo Nix is having a resurgence? He never had any time at Auburn. What's going on here? And I it is really fascinating. Again, I am kind of an Oregon fan at times. I'm an Oregon fan, so I'm excited to see what this is going to be. I'm hopeful that maybe Dan Lanning might actually be a really, really good head coach. It's a possibility. I'm not locking it in yet, but I think there's definitely a possibility of that. And the fact that Bo Nix took a massive jump up from Auburn. I mean, he was like really bad at Auburn to actually being like a pretty good, like potentially an NFL prospect. Like we could be seeing him drafted in the NFL next year, right? The fact that amount of change in just 1 year is stunning. His accuracy went way up, stopped the turnovers, like just was really, really good, especially towards the later end of last year. I'm fascinated to see what this team will do. The interesting thing is on the defense, I'm actually slightly less concerned because, again, Dan Lanning was the defensive coordinator there at Georgia, right? So if he, I feel like he's probably saying, okay, there's a lot of things on defense we got to fix, and he can step up and say, we're fixing them, that's it. We're doing this now, and I'm gonna so I'm slightly less concerned if there's a problem with the defensive coordinator position.
Yeah.
But honestly, like I think this could go very, very well for Oregon, and I'm excited to see where this goes, and I'm hopeful for this team. I don't know if they could take out USC, but it's going to be a hell of a game when they play USC. That's for sure.
They host USC, and as a USC guy, I don't want to ruin the USC preview, but that's the game I'm most concerned of next season. All right, so Robert I don't know, he just wants to make me miserable here. He wants to talk about Colorado. So have at it, pal.
Well, I mean, so again, we're dictating the most interesting team, in quotation marks there. So I will say that, yeah, Colorado's pretty interesting, I gotta say, right? I mean, you go from a team that was 1-11, horrible, fired their head coach, brings in Coach Prime. He brings in the Gucci, as he said, and he brings in just a ton of transfers, a ton of people from his old school, Division II school. I think his son is now the quarterback there as well now. It's just like a fascinating team. And the thing is, again, I'm not necessarily, this team is probably not gonna compete for the conference. I think it's unlikely they compete for a bowl, but they could theoretically get to a bowl game. I think there's a path for them to get to a bowl game. It's an unlikely path, but there's a path there. I think it's going to be fascinating because again, now that we're in a new era of college football, we're in a new era of college football with NIL, with the transfer portal. We're now in a time when you can literally, and this will be a theme when we talk about some of the other Pac-12 schools, where you can literally deconstruct and then rebuild a team in 1 year. And this is going to be an interesting test case for, hey, is this actually possible? Does this work? Can you take a bad team like Colorado, wipe it out, bring in a bunch of new players, which again, theoretically enough money. If you sprinkle infinite enough money into a program, can you just get a better program within 1 year? Can you basically, and this is this is completely brand new for college football. This has never happened before, and I'm very excited to see what we can, the result of this. Can they get to a bowl game? Can they get close to a bowl game? Is this going to be a half decent team? I don't know, and I want to see. Like, this could either be a success, and then people are like, this is going to happen a lot more now, and there's going to be like every year there's going to be 3 to 4 Colorados, or this is going to go horribly, and this is never going to happen again. I don't know which one it's going to be, but I'm excited to see which one it is.
Yeah, I couldn't be further from you on this one. As a guy who loves data, I've got the fourth worst team in all of FBS, and they completely cleared out their roster, and they bring in a bunch of guys, most of whom have very few starts on the FBS level. So I like to piece together a narrative, and there's not enough pieces here, so this is just kind of morbid curiosity for me. The total's 3.5, and I don't see 4 wins on the schedule. But again, who knows? Because there's just not a lot of data there. But the first 5 games are brutal. At TCU, hosting Nebraska, versus Colorado State, which, I'm high on Colorado State, and you are too. And then at Oregon and hosting USC to start the conference. So that could just really be a brutal start that maybe they just don't come back from. So, I don't know. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think
Did
0
you?
and 5 is the most likely start for that team. I think it's going to take time. Colorado has been so bad for so long. Colorado is a team that's always fascinated me. Very early when I got on, I didn't experience this year, but I learned a lot about college football going through old preview magazines. And one of the first things I remember is Colorado, Georgia Tech, split national champions in 1990.
Yep.
Their stadium up in the mountains. They just interested me. So when Colorado, after their mid late '90s peak started to fade, it frustrated me because I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I eventually found out, and it said Colorado just didn't support football. The invitation to the Pac-12 came at the perfect time. The Pac-12 probably shouldn't have invited them, or if they did, they should have said you need to turn your football program around. But that's not something the Pac-12 would ever say to anybody. You come to the Pac and do what you want. So Colorado has a massive turnaround. It's far more than just a roster. It's restructuring their entire program. 73 players left. I think 42 in. They were at like 71 of 85 scholarships last I checked. That could have changed. A couple things in their favor, though, that are interesting. Shannon Turley is their S&C coach, strength and conditioning. Shannon Turley is the guy that Jim Harbaugh brought to Stanford that
Yep.
built Stanford into a beastly football program. Stanford, of course, got tired of the guy's hard-ass attitude. Some players complained his workouts were too tough. Stanford let him go. That's Colorado's game. Deion Sanders is brilliant to get this guy. He's a monster S&C coach. But I think that takes more than one off season. I think that takes 2 or 3 off seasons to get them in the shape he wants them to be in. Their offensive coordinator, Sean Lewis, who left a head coaching job to come coordinate the offense. I think they got some things in place to start rebuilding at Colorado. But if Deion Sanders does really turn this program around year one in the fashion he did it, they used to call it clearing the brush, and coaches did it in very brutal ways. They just ran horrific practices to get guys to quit. The fact Sanders could just run these guys out and make it easy made it kind of NFL-esque. If he does that, Deion Sanders will be the hottest coach in the country, and it won't even be close if he does it year one.
I agree. And, if people think that Deion's just a goof who can recruit, the hiring of Sean Lewis is really shrewd.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of Power 5 programs that would just not even know who Sean Lewis is. So a lot of respect for that. And I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said that Colorado probably shouldn't have been invited to the Pac-12. Are you saying that Larry Scott made a bad decision about something? I really can't imagine that.
It's one of my more controversial opinions.
Okay. we're going to do a separate USC preview, but since we have a very limited man here, Mark, if you just want to give us just a couple of thoughts or impressions on USC.
Yeah, they're pretty trite. They're pretty well worn, but I think they're legitimate questions, and I think it's actually legitimate what USC's been doing. When I hear Lincoln Riley say he's going to be more hands on with the defense, I have no idea what that means. I don't think he probably should be hands on with the defense. I don't think he's a defensive coach. But if he means he's going to put, drawing a blank on his name. What's the DC's name?
Alex Grinch.
Alex Grinch. Thank you. If he's going to put Alex Grinch on a tighter leash, and that's what that means, that could be a good thing. I've heard him say they're filming practice and watching practice film now. He says the right things about what they're going to do with the defense. I think if you're USC, the thing that you have to love most is they're adding bigger bodies to the roster. Transfers, recruiting. They brought in some big bodies on the defensive line, which is just it's where defense starts, is on the defensive line. So that's, if you're looking for reasons to think USC might be better at defense, it's the bodies they're bringing in for the defensive line. But the end of their season last year, between the UCLA game, which they snuck out of, 48-45, they gave up 48, 27 to Notre Dame in an easy win, then 47-46. So that is, if you're looking to make a playoff, if you're looking to be a premier team in the country, that defense doesn't have to get a little better. It has to get a lot better. Offense will be magnificent, but the my very banal observation is this: if Alex Grinch can't do it this year, they got to switch it up with him.
Agree. And don't overlook, even though Notre Dame didn't score a lot of points, look at Drew Pine's numbers for that game. He had like only 3 balls hit the ground. So, okay. Appreciate that. Thanks. And Robert, you and I will get more detail on USC sooner rather than later. Okay. Next team, Washington, 11-2 last season. Second season coming in under Kalen DeBoer. Really a really complete turnaround on offense. I had them as 17th in Team Apex last season. You know what's interesting? Michael Penix, his stats are a little low. I think they encourage him to throw the ball away if just something isn't there. So his stats might not be as great as people think. I have them first in returning Ryan in all of FBS. They returned Rome Odunze, who was 10th in player Ryan, and Jalen McMillan, who was 42nd. Running game needs to improve. The run defense was really, really good last season. But, man, their pass defense was brutal. Only Colorado was worse than the Pac-12. And somehow opponents did a huge favor by running against them 53% of the time. So pretty bad game planning, I think. They were done some favors. Unfortunately, they missed Colorado in the I think that they're going to be double-digit favorites in all of their non-conference games. I think there might be a little value here at them at plus 320 to win the Pac-12 title. Seems generous, considering that their questions are kind of very, fenced around in just that pass defense. So I like them, but they just have a narrative that sticks to quite a few teams like USC and Oregon. Just great offense. Let's see what happens on defense. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, I'm just calling up their win. I got them at they're 320 to win the Pac-12, which seems a little short. I will say, so this is kind of interesting, and one of the things you hit on earlier in the podcast is that Washington is going to have an issue basically recruiting in the future. You're concerned about their recruiting longer term in the Big Ten. The thing is, and this is the interesting thing, this year, not the greatest recruiting class, but they've got a bunch of transfers to replace a lot of stuff. And the thing is, again, this is kind of tying into my point about Colorado. We may be getting to a point where you may not actually need to recruit anymore. You can just get a bunch of transfers. You can they stole. They basically I think they stole a really good wide receiver from Arizona. Oh no, sorry, that was USC. Sorry,
USC,
different team. But there's some other team they've gotten some good pieces from other teams as well. So I think we're at a point now where maybe you don't need to recruit. You can just get all your talent you can need from the transfer portal. And this team is probably improved from last year. Again, it's kind of insane that a first-year head coach went 11-2 on the year. That's kind of nuts. That shouldn't have happened. But again, we liked Washington a lot in some places last year. But again, random losses, lost to UCLA, lost to Arizona State. They couldn't figure those ones out. But then they basically beat everybody else, including Oregon, right? So it's a very interesting team. I think this team is going to be improved. The problem though is that I think this is going to be like, okay, they're going to get like one or two random losses, and then it's going to be the Pac-12 beats itself up again. It's going to be the Pac-12 beats itself up, and then okay, maybe they make the play, maybe they make the conference championship game, but then they either win it or lose it or something, and then they end up in like, I'm not even sure what bowl the Pac-12 is going to this year, because I think the Rose Bowl is one of the semifinals now. So I
Yeah,
don't
it
even know.
is.
It's going to be. So I have them as a lobby team. I think they're improved, but there is a ceiling there, and the ceiling there is USC, Oregon, and Utah. And I think they're going to get better, but I think they also kind of got better too. So I think it's kind of there's that ceiling.
Do you guys have handy what Michael Penix's yards per attempt were? I think they're actually fairly low.
They are, yeah. Like I was saying, because I think they have him throw the ball away a lot. You know, like if read one or read two isn't there. I
Yeah,
heard that on some kind of scheme school. Like it
yeah,
seems like when he's not doing that, his numbers are insane. Just that drags his number down a lot. I have him as a top 15 quarterback last year, but not a top five. And just as an opposing
yeah.
defense, he's in the top five. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, no question, and that's it's the key position at every level of football, the quarterback. And when you have a guy who's a game changing playmaker, and the guy who he's a clutch player as well. He likes big games. He was like that at Indiana. He
Yep.
was like that at Washington for the most part. It wasn't his fault they lost to. Well, he didn't have a great game at UCLA. That's the other game I was going to ask about with Washington. You said their rush defense was good. Was the UCLA game their worst rushing performance as a defense last year,
There were
or how did they?
there was a couple games that really kind of did them in. That was one of them.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that was just I don't know. We both had that somehow. But
that was
first year stuff too. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, you're that's when you're going to be your most consistent. I think, right?
yeah, totally. They rolled into that game 4-0 at the Rose Bowl, and UCLA had looked good, but they played very weak competition. Michigan bought out of their
Yep.
game, et cetera, and UCLA just played really well. Washington is actually down big. That score is a little closer than it looks. They scored late to make it close, and then couldn't finish it off. But the turnaround at Washington was incredible. One of the games I went to in 2021 was Oregon at Washington, because that's the best rivalry in the Pacific Northwest.
Hmm.
Husky Stadium is one of college football's great venues. I was at that game, and I have rarely seen a worse offense on the field than what Washington rolled out against
Yeah.
Oregon. It was
That was
it was
horrible.
painful. It was
Yeah.
painful. Being in the stands, it was like I can't watch these guys anymore. Just put someone else in and see if something happens. Like, this group cannot move the football. So they went from 21.5 points a game to basically 40 points a game in one season. It was their best year since the 2016 playoff year, and that was year one with an off season of practice. So totally agree. Another classic pack story where you're going to have a magnificent offense take the field, and it's going to be what can the defense do? They have a bunch of guys back on defense. They should be better. So Washington has to be. Washington is certainly a contender.
Just to answer your question, I actually pulled up one of my stats here. I have Penix as 29th in yards per attempt last season.
Yeah,
Which,
yeah, okay.
yeah, it doesn't jive with what you see until you kind of consider how often he's tossing it away.
Yeah, that's
Good observation.
interesting hypothesis there.
Yeah. All right. Next, Robert, Utah.
Yeah, so Utah is interesting again. So this is, and as we mentioned before, one of the more consistent teams in the pack. I have this team as a lobby team. Last year they went. Let me just get the correct record here. They went 10-4 last year, so that included the loss in the bowl game to Penn State. They lost to Oregon and UCLA, but they did beat USC twice, which was very impressive. But again, no, it's kind of negated when you lose to UCLA, which was not a particularly amazing team last year, and then also Oregon. So there's problems with that. Also, apparently Cam Rising had a knee injury kind of earlier in a couple weeks ago in the offseason, so there's questions about his health. And I kind of think this team got a little bit lucky last year in a lot of these wins. A lot of these wins were actually kind of pretty close, especially against USC twice. The first time it was definitely like that was a very lucky game. They probably should have lost to USC the first time, and then I think also didn't Caleb Williams get injured in the second game? I think
He did. Yeah,
he did.
that was
He
that
got
was the end
injured
of that game. That was in the first quarter too, or this
in the
maybe early
Pac-12
second quarter.
championship game. Yeah, and they also
Yeah.
lost to Florida last year too. And then just looking around the line here, like they kind of could have lost to Washington State as well. So I think this team got a bit too lucky last year. Okay, yeah, they return some people, they lose some people, but at the same time, I feel like this is just going to be a lobby team. This is going to be a team that's consistent but loses a couple of key games, and that's not going to cut it for this year, the Pac-12. Maybe they can get to the conference championship game through a weird fluke. I'm actually not sure how they did that last year, considering that Washington. Oh no, they would have had the same record as Washington, but they beat Washington, I think, or they didn't play them. You know what? I don't even know how that works. But anyways, they got a bit lucky last year to even get to the championship game, and I think it's
They did. They were. It didn't look like 2 weeks to go in the season that they were going to get there, and just everything fell into place for them. I have them actually stairs down for the same reasons. The thing is, Rising, I actually had him as seventh in the Pac-12 last year for his Apex, which, he's a gamer, but I just think a lot of his bad games get overlooked, or maybe they're all hidden like on the Pac-12 network. Their defense actually was really overrated last season. Everybody talks about how great they were, or at least really good. I think that's just more in reputation. I actually had only, from a pass defense standpoint, this is a murderer's row of horrible defenses. Only Washington, Arizona, and Colorado were worse versus the pass. They're projected to improve a lot, but they kind of need to, because I don't think the offense is there compared to all the other teams that are contenders. Something else to keep in mind, Cam Rising has lost games to injury in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And as you noted, he's not looking great coming into 2023. I think that he runs a lot, and maybe he's a little slight of frame, and that kind of hurts him. Maybe he's just injury prone. The last thing I want to say about Utah, this is just listen to this 4-game stretch starting in October 21st at USC, hosting Oregon, hosting Arizona State, at Washington. Oh my God, what a stretch, right? Now I can exhale. You know what's after that? They're at Arizona. And that's exactly the team you don't want to play. You're on the road against a team that can score like 60 points a game. Circle that one on your calendar. That is the sneaky watch out for game. Arizona is going to be up for them, and they know they're going to be getting a weary Utah team. And I know Utah usually improves through the season, but that could get dicey.
Yeah, that's a definite terror stretch for the Utes. Depending on what happens, they start out with a very tough couple of games. They got Florida at home, and then they're going to Baylor. They'd better beat Florida in Salt Lake City and go into Baylor 1-0. If it starts with a loss to Florida, and Cam Rising, they're talking like he is a definite go to start the season. That would be a very quick turnaround for an ACL. It's it can happen. It's been done. But he might not be 100%. He might have game rust, and he actually just might not be ready to go. They have a backup, I believe his name's Brandon Rose, who they think is pretty good, but he's untested. The advantage that they would have just as a team if Brandon Rose has to go is it's a fairly seasoned offense everywhere else. I think the running back room got stabilized. They scored about 38 points a game last year, and they have good experience back on their offensive line. So wide receiver room, probably not the best, but the offense, if Rising does have to miss the opening game, they can probably get by Florida depending on how much improvement Florida's made. But going to Baylor and starting a backup quarterback, it would probably be hard to emerge 2-0 to start the season. And then, they start the conference slate at home with UCLA. Then they go to Oregon State. So they can beat UCLA at home, but UCLA ran all over them last year. You talked about Utah's overrated defense. Their run defense was fairly bad, and their red zone defense was worse. So They have to be careful with UCLA, but assuming they win that, they're then going up to Corvallis and a good Oregon State team. So they have a couple stretches on this schedule that are just very tricky where you might see a couple 1-1 splits depending on what happens, and then towards the end of the year, depending on injuries and everything else. I think Utah has guys can do it. They have the coaching staff that can do it, but I think I've seen a lot of people pretty high on Utah this year, and I don't think they win the third straight Pac title this year, and I think they probably take a step back.
I think so. To your point, I think maybe it's a matter of Whittingham's kind of maximized them. You've got three really good coaches in their second year now. I think that just might be the difference of them getting kind of passed up here. But all credit to Whittingham. He's a great coach.
Yeah.
To a team that I think, Mark, you're probably more bullish on than I am, the Oregon State Beavers. I see them going down the staircase this year. I need to be convinced on DJU. He was really shaky to be kind at Clemson. A lot of times worse than shaky. He's going to be playing some easier defenses in the Pac-12. But, I just kind of wonder, Smith is a good offensive coach, but why has he not been able to develop, you really haven't had a standout at quarterback. You had Chance Nolan that one season when it was good, but I need to be convinced. They added Zero Ryan through the portal, which is a concern. Their defense was the best in the Pac-12 by far last season. They actually held Caleb Williams to an apex of 52 last season, and Michael Penix to a apex, of 56. That's nuts. Those are by far the worst performances for either of those guys. The problem is they lose four of their starting 5 DBs and 6 of their back 7. That's tough. And Omar Spates, who was their standout linebacker, is now going to be starting for LSU. Other problem is they had 2.7 games of good luck last season. That's going to regress. The total is 8.5 wins. The under's getting crushed. It's at minus 140. So I think that's right. That 8.5 looks really high to me.
Yeah, I agree. I am not a fan of DJ. I've made it clear that basically for the last 2 years he's been right on the fact that he almost beat Notre Dame that one time when Trevor Lawrence had COVID. And they've just been like, he did that one time. He can maybe do it. He could have a good game. And he just has not had a good game. And they've had to rely on the defense ever since. That being said, though, the one mark I will give Oregon State this year is that this is the revenge tour. This is the Pac-12 revenge tour. This is, you left us for dead. We're coming to. That's the only thing. But that's it, though. That's it. That's the only positive I can find, right? I mean, it's literally like, this is our conference now, literally because everybody left the conference. We're all that's left. This is the revenge tour. This is like, you're leaving for the Big Ten. You're leaving for the Big 12. You left us all here alone to die. We're coming. This is our year to win this, whatever's left of this conference. That's the only thing I can think of. Outside of that, yeah, I have concerns. Again, Oregon State, a relatively good team, but usually not a 10-3 season. Again, they got a very deflated Florida in the bowl that made them 10-3. That would have been instead they were 9-3 before the bowl. That sounds closer to what they are, but I think this is a mean regression team. I think this team could kind of regress back to the mean. They also beat Oregon in the season finale too. They probably shouldn't have. They just had a really good defense last year. The defense regresses. I kind of feel like they have a worse quarterback now, but that's for other people to decide. But let's see. The only thing is that this could potentially be their revenge tour. So let's see if that motivates them or not. I don't know.
Wouldn't that be amazing if they did it? It would be another circle back on history. Just a quick throwback to the PCC I mentioned earlier. That league dissolved. 1959 is when the new PAC came into place. So between 56 and 58, the PCC dissolved. And one of the reasons the league broke apart is because the smaller schools in the north, Washington State, Oregon State, Idaho at that time, and combined their powers. Basically, everybody combined their powers against Washington, Cal, USC, and UCLA. Some of the worst penalties in conference history were thrown against UCLA, USC, Washington, and Cal. They were banned from the Rose Bowl, some from several years. In those several years that they were banned from the Rose Bowl, first Oregon State won the PCC, then Oregon won the PCC. Now, at that time, that's 1957-58, Oregon, no one would have ever dreamed Oregon was going to have a good football program. Oregon was the bottom of the PCC most years. Oregon State was right there with them. So part of the reason the league broke up is because they weren't going to take suspensions from the likes of Wazoo, Oregon State, and Oregon. They weren't kicking USC and UCLA and Washington out of the Rose Bowl anymore. So they were actually excluded from the new PAC for several years before they were invited back. So it would be quite the irony this many years
Wow.
later for Oregon State to run them out with the Rose Bowl run. I totally agree on DJU. Unimpressive at Clemson. His footwork was bizarre. His throwing was erratic. I didn't see what the hype was on him. It's gonna if he can't do it and the guy they got behind him can't do it, Oregon State's gonna be in trouble. But Jonathan Smith is a great offensive coach.
Yep.
I think Oregon State has been 30 plus points a year every year for the last 3 seasons.
Wow.
So they score points and they play good defense. Last year they were the top total defense, top scoring defense in the conference. They did lose the linebackers that you mentioned. They're replacing guys in the defensive backfield. Their defensive line is strong. So they're good at the key spot. Oregon State is not a powerhouse. They're not a consistent team. They're not used to having any kind of weight on their back. Any predictions going their way. Last year, I think it was the 3rd time in school history they'd won double-digit games. So that's how far down Oregon State is as a football program. They just don't do it very often. Utah at home, UCLA at home, Washington at home, and they're on the road for Wazoo and Oregon. Early schedule at San Jose State, UC Davis, San Diego State. They should come out of that 3-0. So Oregon State, I don't know if I'm high on them, but I don't think they're necessarily a fluke last year. I think they got a chance to run it back a little bit this year.
Interesting. I like the variety of opinions, and I really, really like that perspective. I'm a Pac-12 guy, and I had no idea about that history. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
That's awesome. All right. Last team we're gonna cover here today. UCLA. They went 9-4 last season. I have them as stairs down. Maybe just in no small part because the last time we saw them, it was at the Sun Bowl, losing to Pat Narduzzi after taking a lead with 34 seconds left. That's it's not really easy to get out dueled by Pat Narduzzi when the game is tight in the late moments, but they found a way to do it. They had the best running game in the conference last season by my metrics, but they lose Zach Charbonnet. The offensive line, the losses are kind of getting to where I might be concerned. They might be starting a true freshman at quarterback. People that know X's and O's say that Dante Moore is more of a pocket guy, and he might not be the best fit. I heard one person say that they think Colin Schley, who's a transfer from Kent State, might actually be the starter by season end, as he's a more of a rollout guy. They retain a good amount of receiving from last season. They added a receiver from Cal, who was in the top 100 in Ryan. They added Kyle Ford from USC, who was a very highly recruited receiver. He definitely did not fit the Lincoln Riley offense, but he's a really good receiver. They should be one of the most improved defenses in all of college football, based on my improvement metrics. They have a new DC. The reports on him are favorable, but we'll see. The defense is pretty much always stunk under Kelly, except for the COVID season, which makes no sense, but nothing made sense that season. They get USC's conference schedule last season, so they avoid both Oregon and Washington. They've got a great path. The non-conference is really nice, too. They host Coastal, host Jamie Chadwell. They're at San Diego State, and they host NC Central. I think that this might be the opposite of the better team, and you don't see it in their record. I think they probably take a step back, but you might not see it in their record. What do you think, Robert?
Yeah, in terms of UCLA, I'm actually kind of low on them. I actually do have them as straight up stairs down. I think Dorian Thompson-Robinson is very hard to replace. Now again, this is kind of my theory between college and the NFL. He actually had a very good preseason game against the New York Jets there in the NFL Hall of Fame game last week. He was actually very good there, and my theory is that if someone is good in the NFL, then that means that the team next year is going to suffer for that. So waiting on Anthony Richardson to see about what's going to happen in Florida this year. But this is the thing. So I think it's hard to replace. Also, this team also did get very lucky again. Them losing um, to Pittsburgh is not particularly great. This is a team that struggled a little bit to put away Bowling Green in the first week of the season. Or no, sorry, they struggled to put away South Alabama. That's right.
Yeah.
A team we actually really liked. They
My
did
Jags.
lose to Oregon. Yeah. Basically, yeah, like not the. This team had some struggles last year in a lot of these close games. I think this is going to be a rebuilding year for this team. They also lose a lot of other pieces too. I think they got lucky last year. I think this is a stairs down team for me.
Yeah, I'm looking at which close games are you thinking they got lucky? And the South Alabama game was a scrap to the end. That one was could have easily gone either way. That was a field goal late to win it.
Literally at the gun.
Most of their other wins were pretty healthy blowouts. The one horrific loss was the upset to Arizona at home. That was a brutal performance by basically everyone, particularly the defense. And then the pit loss in the Sun Bowl. You know, bowl games used to mean a lot more, and some of them do mean a lot. It kind of depends on what happens. Zach Charbonnet didn't play in that game. DTR was hurt in that game. UCLA was without its defensive coordinator for essentially the entire season, Bill McGovern, and he passed away in the offseason. He was deathly ill. So they had an analyst running their defense, which might help account for the 50 yards in 40 seconds in a game-winning field goal. It was a tough loss for sure. It was one of those things where it's like you just can't have a defense that bad at this level, or everybody's got to go. But the guy already was gone and he passed away. So new defensive coordinator is a breath of fresh air in Westwood for certain. Offensive line is a huge concern. I think 3 of 5 guys are need to be replaced. I think they're going to start 3 transfers. They have an anchor at center who's been there a long time, and Duke Clemens is going to anchor the line. So they got a good guy snapping the ball. Regarding quarterback, I have not heard what you heard. Ethan Gerbers has had more number 1 reps. Dante Moore 2, and he looks a bit like a freshman with a lot of talent. But Colin Schlee, from what I've heard, is probably not going to play, barring a big change.
Really?
He doesn't throw the ball at the level they thought he was going to throw it. He is a rollout guy, but apparently he's not putting the ball on the money. From what I've heard, I'm in Chicago. I'm not watching practice, so I could be totally wrong about that. But Chip Kelly is a one of the finest run play offensive coordinators we've seen in the last however many decades. And once they can run, they can throw. So UCLA has good running backs in the backfield, and they have excellent pass-catching targets. So whether it's going to be the run-pass action, whether it's going to be quick release to help the quarterbacks, wherever it's going to be, they got playmakers. So I think you're going to see another UCLA offense that can put up points on most teams are going to play. And once again, it's the same old boring Pac-12 story. Are they going to be able to stop anyone on defense? Are they going to have a defensive line? Are they going to tackle in the open field? Blah blah blah. So it's going to be a wait to find out situation. They have 2 strong guys on the edge on defense, and some pretty good linebackers to transfer from Cal. And then the defensive backfield again is a little shaky. So we're going to see what the coach-up job has been in the spring and fall, and we'll find out about UCLA. To me, it's a cop out, but I'm a wait and see. I got to see how it goes.
That's appreciated perspective. And one thing I like that about Schlee, and I kind of want to circle that back to a team we talked about earlier, and a coach that we talked about earlier. What does that say about Sean Lewis's ability to really make Kent State's offense no fun to play when their quarterback really can't throw the ball with accuracy?
Yeah.
Just something to keep in mind. Not this year. I think more of a year 2, year 3. That hire is getting more shrewd by the moment of Lewis to Colorado.
Yeah.
Okay. Final questions. So we have 4 questions. Start with you on this one, Robert. The likelihood that a Pac-12 team gets a playoff bid.
I think 35-ish%.
Give me 25%. There's some things would have to break right. And I'm trying to think of who it would be and what would happen to them once they got there. And it's going to depend on how the
What?
defense performs. So USC could score its way into it. Once
Yeah.
they get there, what's going to happen? So I don't know. Give me 25. I'm pretty low on them making the playoff.
Okay. Yeah, I had it at 40%. And we want to, since it's the last year, we don't want to speak ill of the imminently dead here. So we won't think about what happens to the Pac-12 team in the playoff. It won't go well. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
Three Heisman bets from this conference. Mark, you want to go first on this?
Yeah. Since nothing's really at stake, let me give you like my dark horse, my long odds, the one you just
Yeah.
throw a few bucks down on for fun. And one of the reasons I like Oregon State, I didn't mention this guy. Give me Damian Martinez, Oregon
Ooh.
State running back. I think he's going to be one of the best backs in the conference. And let's just pretend the Beavs go wild. They win the Pac-12. They win a Heisman Trophy. They go to the playoff, and they lose by
Yes.
40 in the playoff. But it's a great season.
Yes. Okay. I'm down with that. Robert?
The thing is, I kind of hate all these numbers, like Caleb Williams plus 500, yuck. Bo Nix 14 to 1, hate that as well. Michael Penix Jr. 14 to 1, that's arguably worse. I don't even see. I don't know. Rising is 66 to 1. All these are bad. I hate all of them.
What a spokesman you are for the conference.
Well, the thing is, because usually people don't win it twice, so I don't love Caleb Williams. I need a much higher number on Caleb Williams to win it. I feel like of all of them, Bo Nix probably has the most upside, maybe. I know that sounds crazy, because it is crazy, but it's maybe less crazy. I don't know. It's just, it seems... Because, like, if they fix their defense, they could actually win this thing, and then they could win the conference. And I think that's enough to win the Pac-12 and go to the playoffs, and that would... Now, again, this is going to be a down year for quarterbacks. Ohio State's replacing their quarterback. Alabama's replacing their quarterback. So there's going to be a kind of lack of top-tier quarterback candidates to win this. I'm not particularly high on Drake May because I suspect they're going to lose a couple... They're going to drop a couple games. Oregon goes undefeated. Bo Nix probably wins the Heisman. I don't love it at 14 to 1. I don't love it at all at 14 to 1. But I don't know, maybe. If I have to place a bet, gun to my head, it's like, okay, fine, I'll go with Bo Nix. But I'm not happy about it. I'm under protest.
Yeah, very fair. It's hard to find any value in these. If I'm going with 3, Nix for the same reason, and Penix really for the same reason. The fact that they're both at the same price makes sense. Although the price does stink. I like you. I don't like Caleb Williams to repeat at 5.5. I wouldn't even like him at even like maybe even twice that. It's so hard to repeat. If you're going against a million things, people are just looking for a reason not to vote for you. I'm going to go way down. I'm actually going to say Dorian Singer at 100 to 1. I had him ranked 13th among receivers in all of FBS last season, and I think that he is a perfect fit for this offense, and he might put up some crazy, crazy numbers if they wind up scoring as many points as some think. So
yeah, he's a spectacular player. He could definitely win some awards.
yeah, he scared the hell out of me when USC played him last season. That was no fun to go through that.
Yep.
All right, pick one upset in this conference. You got one, Robert?
Okay, I got a really crazy one, so I'll go last. You guys go.
Is this an upset winner of a division?
Upset win in a game.
You can be, in a game.
Oh, upset win in a game. Okay, well, go ahead, BuckMetrics, and
all right.
I actually had a division thing, so
Yeah, I mentioned mine earlier. That case, I think Utah loses at Arizona. They have that stretch of three just brutal games in 4 weeks, and then they exhale, and they exhale right when they're going to get punched, and it's not going to be fun.
Yeah, that's a good pick. Just going quickly here. I'm going to stick on my Oregon State theme. I think Washington could get beat in Corvallis. It's the second to last game of the year for the Huskies, and they're at Oregon or they're sorry they're it's the second last week for the Huskies, and they have to go
Mm-hmm.
up to Corvallis to play. So who does Washington get after that? They're at Oregon State. They're playing the Apple Cup after
Yeah,
that.
but Apple
So
Cup, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I'll take that. Give me the Beavs making someone else's life miserable up in Corvallis.
I like that.
Yeah. Well, USC knows what it's like to have some seasons ruined up there.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. I was just getting over that.
I thought you might have forgot.
Okay, now for mine. Mine's a bit crazy. Mine is week 1, not week 0. Week 1. It is a 21.5 point underdog. Colorado to beat TCU. This, I know it sounds crazy, but it is like the perfect, because it is, people think TCU went to the national championship game last year. They'll still be a good team this year. People think Colorado's people are like, oh, this Colorado team, it's overrated. This is the thing. I know it sounds crazy, but on a narrative level, it would be the craziest thing ever, and it's just so crazy that it just might happen.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't see it, but if it did, it would be one of the wildest starts just imaginable.
I'm going to get you a T-shirt for this year that says 2023 Colorado. You're totally in on the Colorado cult.
It's so funny because I know there is this cult. Like, apparently Colorado has the most money on them to win the Pac-12, and I just put
Wow.
apparently they do. Yeah, the one sportsbook said that. I put $20 on them to get over 4.5. Just over 4.5 wins. It's like, this is a fun bet. Let's see if this happens. Like, I'm not like they're gonna win the conference. I'm like, hey, maybe they could almost make a bowl. That's what I'm like. Maybe they could. I got it like 2-1. I'm like, maybe they could kind of make a bowl. But people are like, they're gonna win the conference. I'm like, that's a bit much. I am not like. And here's the thing. The only reason I like this game is because I have TCU as a regression candidate. I think TCU is going to be worse this year. I think Colorado's going to be better. They're going to be caught sleeping, and this Colorado team's going to want to prove it week 1, and this would be insane for narratives. So give me this. I think this is a trap. This is a trap written all over it. This line actually came down. I actually got it originally. I think at 23.5. It's down to 21.5. Why is that happening? I think this is a trap game. I think somehow Colorado could win this game. It's going to be hilarious if this happens.
It would be a very college football storyline, and I'm sure Mark would agree with that.
Oh man, it would be one for the ages. And if they won that game, I think that would be the one thing standing between them and an 0-5 start. This schedule for a brand new team, brand new coaching staff could not be worse.
No. Yeah.
Nebraska and Colorado have a disdain for one another.
Yeah.
Nebraska and Matt Rule has brought back the Nebraska tradition. Matt Rule knows about the Big 8, Big 12 Colorado-Nebraska rivalry. Nebraska wants to kill Colorado. They're much further along as a program than Colorado. Colorado State rivalry game. Colorado State is an upswing team, in my opinion. Then they're going to Oregon and USC after that. I mean, it is a savage opening to that season.
It is, and not to make this a different preview, but I'm glad that you are bullish on Colorado State. We just did the Mountain West, and we both love the Rams this season. Totally under the radar too. Not a lot of people that are on that. Love it.
I think they're going to have a pretty good team.
Yeah. All right, last question. Who plays for the conference title? I will go first. I will go very boring and say USC and Washington just barely over Oregon.
Go ahead,
I'm
Robert.
going to go USC Oregon. I'll be boring too.
Yeah, I really think that's probably where it's at, though. It's going to be the winner of Washington, Oregon. Give me USC, Washington. I think that's probably the most likely matchup.
Sounds good. Mr. Schipper, thank you so much for your time. Let us know when that book is getting ready to come out, and we will definitely have you back to give you all kinds of pub on that. You have been an amazing guest. I love your knowledge of the history of the game. It far surpasses mine, which not a lot of people can say. So hats off to you. Looking forward to your book.
Hey guys, I appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun. Love talking football and very generous with your time. And I appreciate that offer. And I will circle back. So I'll see you guys on Twitter and check in anytime.
Oh,
For
do you want
sure.
to give your Twitter handle too, just in case? He's a great follow. You gotta follow him.
Yeah, I'm at fifth down, 5th down CFB, fifth down CFB, Mark Schipper. I think you'll pull it up if you type in either one.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you all. We'll see you all
Thank you,
soon.
everybody.
All right, guys, take care.